So, interested in hearing, and I'm going to invite you to shout out. When some of you are kids, all of us have been kids at one point. When you were a kid, what did Easter mean to you? Candy. Other things? Money? Easter bunny. Okay. What? Any? Easter dinner? Jesus rose from the dead. Woohoo! You were much more religious than I was, just so you know. I never once heard that Easter was about an empty tomb. It was Easter eggs and then chocolate. And I was amazed at this. This is the chocolate bunny that my grandma got me every year from as early as I can remember till I was 18. Once you got 18, you didn't get chocolate bunny anymore, but all the way up to 18. And I can remember, the little eye was this little sugar thing. Chocolate. Easter bunnies, obviously. Easter for me was also ham. Thanksgiving was turkey. Easter was ham. And see, when I was a kid, turkey was, but ham was awesome. Grandpa would always say a prayer. It's like very rarely did I ever hear any prayers, but always at Easter. And I had this one time where I said, "Amen, pass the ham," because I was just so excited about getting the ham, and I messed it up. No, amen. Okay, and that was it. And I would have been completely shocked if you would have told me that Easter was the high point of the Christian year, that this was the greatest of all holidays for Christians. I would have been like, really? I mean, isn't it Christmas? And my answer was probably Christmas, but 4th of July was really close. You could do fireworks. It was like the best thing ever. I mean, but honestly, Easter was like way down. I mean, it was below Halloween. I was a guy, so better than Valentine's Day, but not much. I mean, it was just the way it was. But now I'm an adult, and I shared with Michelle that, now it's become Easter. And today, the question for us, and especially, what is the real meaning of Easter? Why this day? Empty tomb? Jesus rose from the dead. And we're going to talk about that today. What does this mean for us? And the way to really flesh out some of the meaning of Easter is I want us to walk the road with two disciples, two followers of Jesus. One of them, we're told his name is Cleopas, and probably the person walking with him is Mary, his wife. And so we're going to start by walking the road to Emmaus with them. And I want you to picture, it's Sunday afternoon, the Sunday after Jesus was crucified. They are probably walking with their heads bowed, with heavy steps. They're talking to one another. And it is important to feel what they were feeling. If we're going to understand the meaning of Easter, we got to feel with them what they were feeling. So, if you're old enough, do you remember when the Twin Towers were struck on 9/11? Imagine what it was like if you lived in New York. Imagine what it was like if you actually had somebody in the building when the towers were struck. Something that happened just this week, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. What would it be like if you were in Paris and that was happening? What would it be like if you were a devout Catholic and you lived in Paris? What happens if that's the actual church that you worshiped in? I remember reading one thing this week. Somebody's, their reaction was Western civilization is burning. I think the earliest that I felt this was when I was actually a kid about 8, 9 years old. My My parents' marriage was falling apart, and I thought it was going to end in divorce. My mom moved out for 2 weeks. And I can remember being huddled under a pool table, just calling out, asking for help. Just give me some shelter. Just bring this to us. Just stop what's the world falling apart around me. I got back from vacation/study leave this week, and there was 2 pages of an update on what's happening in the lives of people in our church family. People in the hospital. There was a couple of big reunions of Westsiders down at the hospital over the last couple of weeks. Operations. This feeling is the feeling that people get when they get diagnosed with cancer. It's the feeling that happens when your child gets diagnosed with an incurable condition. It's the feeling that happens when your marriage is falling apart, or when a spouse dies. Everything's going right, and then suddenly everything is taken and your world is falling apart and crumbling. Now, what happens is that Jesus comes to Cleopas and Mary on this road to Emmaus. He meets them there in the midst of their world falling apart. And I want to put forward to you that this is part of the meaning of Easter, that Jesus is there for you. Easter means that he is there for you. So, Jesus comes to them on the road. They don't even recognize him. And he asks them this question, Luke chapter 24, verse 17. He asks them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" And they are so floored, they just stop walking altogether, and their heads are down to the ground. They can't believe that he's asking them this question. One of them, named Cleopas, asks him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And then Jesus says this. What things? The one who knows all, the one who knows exactly what has happened, the only one at this point who actually truly understands all the meaning of what has happened, the one that we are told is the true light that gives light to everyone so that we all can see. He says, what things? Not because he doesn't know, but he's saying, tell me about it. When life feels like it's falling apart, when you're in the midst of a storm, tell Jesus about it. He's right there. You may not feel him, you may not really even recognize that he's there, but he's there. So, when I was huddled under that pool table, I'm sitting there and I'm praying, and I don't know God's name. I'm just asking for him to help bring this to a stop. I wanted shelter. Today I know the name of that shelter. I know who to talk to. Talk to Jesus. He wants to help you. He says, tell me about it. Come to me. Share the burden. I'm with you. I'm for you. It's going to be okay. Whatever your problems are, whatever the situation, talk to Jesus. You don't even actually have to feel his presence. He's there. And you can call him by name. He wants to rescue you. Now, what's funny in this story is that they end up telling Jesus about Jesus. They don't even recognize him, but he was a man, he was a prophet. There was nobody like him. And I want us to clue in on the words in Luke 24, verse 20 and 21. They tell him a little bit about the greatness of Jesus, and then they say, the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was going to be the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped. Now, we have a pretty good idea what they hoped for. We have a good idea of what the common Jewish hope was in the first century. Life was tough. And what they were hoping for was the promises of the Old Testament to be fulfilled. And there were specific promises that they leaned on. Our God is going to send us a king in the line of David. And our king is going to come, and he's going to fight our enemies. And he's going to fight the fight that we can't win. And he's going to do battle with our enemies. And he is going to overcome our enemies. And what they were looking for was concrete help. It was hard underneath Roman oppression. It was brutal. It was about taxes. It was about sucking the resources from the extremities of the empire and bringing them to Rome. If you were a Jewish peasant and you lived in those days, it was not uncommon, because there were times of severe famine even, where you would watch your children go hungry and you would struggle to feed them over the course of the year because of all of the money and resources that was taken from you and given to Rome. A Roman soldier could come and conscript you and use you for a day, whatever you were doing. And they were experiencing this pressure, and they were looking for relief. And what Cleopas and Mary, we had hoped that this was him. And if you had seen him, if you had heard him, his words, the things that he did, his power, we were so sure it was him. And Jesus listens, and then Jesus comes and he tells them the story of the Old Testament. Oftentimes people go, one of the better Bible studies that you could ever be invited into. And Jesus, and now what happens is that Jesus comes and he brings more light into the situation. He walks them through the Old Testament story and he points out what they had missed. And what he was really doing was he was giving them reason for hope. Why go to Jesus? Why tell Jesus? Because he's going to come in and he's going to give you reason for hope. He's going to bring light into your situation. He's going to help you be able to see this from a new perspective. Now, here's one of my guesses. I'm sure, I really am sure that one of the stories that he would have pointed to is the story of Joseph. If you're not familiar with the story of Joseph, it comes at the end of Genesis, the book of Genesis, and it is a compelling story. But it is a story that lines up so much with what happened to Jesus. Forsaken by his brothers, sold into slavery, handed over to foreign powers, falsely accused, imprisoned, left for dead. And then here's the point of the story. Joseph sees it in the end. And Jesus would have pointed, you remember the purpose of the story of Joseph? What you did for evil, what was intended for harm, God was right there working out his good. And this is part of the meaning of Easter. God is right there in the midst of our darkness, and he's working out his good purpose. It can be hard, it can be difficult. You're going through it, and you're sitting there and saying, where is God, and all of this stuff. And you know where you look? Look to the cross. And he has given us the symbol to help us believe and understand. In Jesus' day, the cross was a symbol. It meant Rome won. And if you were crucified, it meant that you lost. Rome won, you lost. And then if you're a Jew, it even had more meaning. Because the Jews understood that anybody who dies on a tree dies under a curse. And in practicality, what that meant is that person's going to hell. And Jesus takes that symbol and he transforms it into the most beautiful symbol that we have today. Because when you look at the cross today, what you see is you see the story of unconditional, self-sacrificing love. Nobody takes my life from me, Jesus says. I lay it down of my own accord. And you know what he says after he says that? He says, only to pick it up again. I know what I'm doing. 3 times before his crucifixion, he told his disciples, here's what's necessary. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be handed over to angry men. They are going to kill me, but I am going to be raised again. And Jesus takes this symbol of brutal oppression and he transforms it into the most beautiful symbol of love that we have today. And he can work in your life, whatever the situation, whatever the circumstance, and he can bring power and he can transform. God is working good. We may not understand. Some things happen and it is absolutely terrible and tragic. The cross was terrible and tragic. Falsely accused, wrongly condemned, crucified, brutally killed. And Jesus takes it and he turns it around. He can do it in your life. Now, there's only one way that this works. And this is the third meaning of Easter. It means that Jesus won. Not only did he die on the cross, but 3 days later, he rose from the dead. Good job. Jesus told his disciples 3 different times, this isn't going to end in defeat, it's going to end in victory. You see, Cleopas and Mary, they were partially right. Jesus came to fight our enemy. They just had the wrong enemy. You see, Jesus came to save Jews, but he also came to save Romans and Greeks and Africans and Arabs and Europeans and Chinese and even Americans. He is the Savior of the world. Now, we have an enemy. The Bible actually, to get specific, really identifies an unholy trinity. Satan, sin, death. There is a personal, spiritual, malevolent force who wants to destroy us, who hurls insults, accusation, shame. He is more powerful and more crafty than any of us, but not Jesus. Jesus won. Jesus has kicked him out of heaven. Literally, he got bounced out of heaven. He has no power over us in Jesus Christ. There is no accusation. There is no condemnation. Anything that he says, Jesus has undone. He tempts us, and every once in a while we fall and we sin. Now, sin is something that sometimes we do, and it's a choice, and it brings with it, and sometimes we know we did wrong. Sometimes we don't know we did wrong. And what the enemy does is he takes that and he says, well, you see, there's no hope for you. You're outside the pale. There's no way that God could forgive you. There's nothing. But Jesus, he has defeated that enemy of sin. There is no sin that cannot be forgiven. There is nothing that you have done or can do that will be bigger than what Jesus can forgive. And there's times in life where you sit there and just go, really? Yes. And again, come into the story of Jesus and the cross. Think about it. Just look at what happens. When Jesus is being crucified, the very men who nailed his hands and his feet to the cross, they are sitting there and they are casting lots for his clothes. And Jesus looks down and he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If Jesus can forgive the people who did that to him, he can forgive you anything. And the final enemy is death. And death has no hold on Jesus. And if you're in Jesus Christ, it has no hold on you. Yeah. I mean, there is a wrongness to death. When somebody that's close to you dies, it screams out and says, this isn't right. It was never God's plan. And Jesus came and he affirmed that death is not our future. Death is going to be undone. We're going to be raised from the dead. Jesus has won. But I want you to think about Mary and Cleopas, and they didn't recognize Jesus, and they heard this great Bible study, and they were getting all of these pieces together. And then Jesus broke bread, and their eyes were opened, and suddenly they see that it's Jesus before them, and then Jesus disappears. And they're like, oh. And they run back 7 miles to Jerusalem to go see everybody. Could you believe just what happened? And I want you to put forward that their excitement is not that they're now waiting to die to go to heaven. Their excitement is Jesus is alive, and it's now time for us to start living, because Jesus says, I've come that you might have life, and more and better life than you've ever imagined. And we're not just waiting to die to get to heaven or to have this new life come, but this is power today, and this is the other thing that Easter means. Easter means the power of God for us today to live a new life. The old ways of living, stuck under this hard taskmaster of sin, which enslaves us, which is like an addiction that we don't have power over. Jesus has come and says, no, I'm going to give you power. I'm going to set you free. This is real power for us today. If there is some power over you that is oppressive, that leads to death instead of life, Jesus is saying, I have the power to help you live a new life. Whatever tragedy, whatever storm, however difficult it may be, Jesus is here and he says, okay, I'm with you, I'm for you, and I can give you hope no matter what. Every once in a while, and I think probably most often you see this on television, the gospel gets abused by some people who preach it with the health and wealth, and they promise these things about if you just have enough faith, then everything will be hunky-dory, and that's not our story. No, Jesus is right there in the midst of the storms, and he's going to get us through the storms. But this life, there's hard things, but one danger that we have is this. We avoid the health and wealth gospels, but we don't remind you that there is real power today. And today, on this day, when we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, what I want to tell you is there is real power to live a new life. He answers prayers. He heals. He moves mountains. He wants to bless you. He wants to give you joy. He wants to give you a peace beyond your understanding. He wants to heal your wounds. Easter means all of that, and the big question is, how do we experience that power today? And this is important because if we just have the ideas up here and it never gets to down here where we actually feel his power in us, we're missing it. Well, let me put forward to you that the way to experience Jesus' power is living the very same way that Jesus lived. And let me put forward to you the very last prayer that Jesus prayed from the cross. Luke records this, Luke 23, verse 46. Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. You want to experience the power of God? Commit your life to him. It's that simple. It's about grace. It's not about what you do. It's about trusting in who God is. We have different words for this. Surrender, faith. The word that I want to give you today is worship. Your whole life, surrendered, committed for God, trusting in him to be your God, letting him have that first place in your heart. Now, I want you to understand something about how Jesus, when he said this prayer, into your hands I commit my spirit. It wasn't the first time that he had done that. This was the way that Jesus lived. He didn't just do it on Friday in the midst of all of the pressure, but he had done it on Thursday, and he'd done it on Wednesday, and he'd done it on Tuesday, and he'd done it the week before, and the month before, and the year before. He had lived a life of committing himself to trusting in his Father's goodness. This commitment is our worship. There's a myriad of ways in which we live it out, and I'm inviting you to live a life of commitment, which is really a life of worship. You're going to pray and you're going to talk to God in the midst of the storm. You're going to listen to God and you're going to try to obey God. It's done in simple things. We gather on Sunday mornings together as a community. We're never intended to live this life alone. We need one another. We gather with a life group, a small band of friends, and we pray for one another and we encourage one another. We serve in Jesus' name. We sing with all the breath that the Spirit gives us, the praise and thanksgiving to God. This was Jesus' life. You know that when he prayed this final prayer, he knew that he was praying Psalm 31:5. Jesus had lived a life of prayer. If you pay attention to his words, he's often quoting the Psalter. He prayed the Psalms. This is Psalm 31:5. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Deliver me, Lord, my faithful God. Jesus didn't even have enough power to say the last part of this prayer, but he didn't have to because he'd already lived that life. It all came together on the cross for him. All the preparation, all of the commitment, all of that stuff. And there in the heat of the moment, when he was being mocked and ridiculed, he didn't respond back with a word. When they crucified him, he said, Father, forgive them. And he breathed up his last and he trusted in his Father. He lived a life of commitment. That's how the power comes. I invite you to stand. There's going to come a time in your life, I am sure, because Jesus promises this, when a storm's going to come. And that storm is going to shake you, and it's going to be like a giant of unbelief rises up against you with a sword. You know, picture David and Goliath. And that giant points his sword at you, and he mocks you. And he's going to tell you that you are pathetic, that there's no way that God is with you. But you're going to live a life of commitment to Jesus Christ. You're going to live this life today where into your hands I commit my spirit. And I'm going to say it tomorrow, and I'm going to say it the next day. And I'm going to live a life of worship, and I'm going to pray. And when that day comes, that giant of unbelief is going to get scared. Because you're going to be able to stand there, and you're going to be able to say, now say this with me, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Say it again. I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that means that God is right there with me in the darkness working out his good purpose. It means that Jesus has won. It means that no matter what is thrown my way, I know who my God is, and I know that he's there. And I'm going to be able to stand up, and I'm going to be able to praise him in the midst of that storm. Will you say it with me one more time? I believe in the resurrection of Jesus. Because Jesus has won. Jesus has defeated the power of death, the power of Satan, the power of sin. Our life is not this thing about being a hero in a moment. It's about living life with God every day, being committed every day. And then in those moments of pressure, in those moments of overwhelming fear, Jesus shows up for you and gives you what you need. Let us worship now.